The onset of the frequency does not begin with a sound, for in the absolute zero of the void, there is no medium to carry the scream of a dying star. Yet the marrow inside your femur will begin to vibrate at a rate of precisely 3.42 Hz, a frequency that corresponds to the structural failure of human sanity. It starts as a subtle thinning of the oxygen in your immediate surroundings, an atmospheric theft where the air molecules seem to retreat toward a single invisible point behind your left shoulder, leaving you to inhale the scent of ozone and burnt copper. You may check your barometer and find it steady at 1013 hectopascals, but the crushing weight pressing against your ribcage suggests a pressure equivalent to the depths of the Mariana Trench. This is the first ripple of the displacement, the moment when the cosmic entity, Kaspiel, turns its eyeless gaze toward this specific coordinate of the third planet, causing the local gravitational constant to fluctuate, a shift so minute that only the fluid in your inner ear can detect it through a sudden, nauseating vertigo. The atmospheric pressure directly over your scalp, a region measuring roughly 75 square centimeters, will decrease by 0.005 millibars, creating a sensation akin to the initial stages of a deep-sea dive where the water attempts to push your skull inward. This is not a physical change, but a precognitive phantom, an echo from a future where your bodily integrity will be compromised by the sheer absence of conventional forces. You will hear, faintly at first, a sound that resembles the resonant frequency of a colossal, hollow bell, struck once every 57 seconds from a distance of an immeasurable number of light years. This is not a sound that travels through the air. It travels through the fundamental fabric of space-time itself, vibrating the very atoms of the chair you are currently occupying. The ambient light in your periphery will begin to dim, not through a reduction in luminosity, but by a subtle shift in its chromatic value, with the reds and yellows being slowly consumed by the deeper blues and purples. This spectral alteration is the initial phase of Kaspiel's attempt to recalibrate your retinal cones, preparing them for the reception of wavelengths that exist outside the visible spectrum of ordinary human perception. You might experience a fleeting sensation of coldness on the back of your neck, a chill that drops the local skin temperature by 0.8 degrees Celsius, despite the consistent warmth of the room. This cold is the energetic residue of reality being peeled back, a localized effect of the universe exhaling its breath. Every hair follicle on your arms will stand erect, not in response to a sudden draft, but to the static electricity building in the very air around you, a charge of negative 2.5 kilovolts per square meter, the precursor to a localized spatial distortion. Your internal biological clock, regulated by the suprachiasmatic nucleus, will perceive a jump of 3 hours and 23 minutes backward in time, even as external chronometers indicate the linear progression of the present. This temporal disjunction is a direct consequence of Kaspiel's proximity, as the entity's presence introduces a temporal eddy, a whirlpool in the river of causality, announcing its impending arrival. The structural integrity of the localized reality begins to shear not with a visual tear, but with the sound of 1,000 glass violins being crushed under a hydraulic press, a dissonant screech that bypasses the eardrum and resonates directly within the temporal lobe. Space-time at this coordinate begins to exhibit signs of fatigue, stretching like overextended sinew as the distance between your hand and your face is no longer measured in centimeters, but in the time it takes for for a photon to lose its sanity. You will hear the friction of the planet's rotation, a low tectonic moan that sounds like rusted iron plates the size of continents rubbing together, a sound that human vocal cords were never meant to perceive. The light from your lamp will begin to bend in a clockwise spiral, losing its warmth and assuming a hue of 380 nanometers. A violet so deep it borders on the ultraviolet spectrum that blinds the retina while simultaneously scorching the optic nerve with forbidden geometry. The air pressure inside your lungs will subtly increase, reaching 105.2 kilopascals. Yet you will find yourself gasping for breath as the very oxygen molecules seem to lose their ability to bind with your hemoglobin. This is not suffocation, but a biological rejection of the altered reality, where the fundamental constants governing gas exchange are being subtly overwritten. The sensation in your peripheral vision will be that of falling upwards, a counterintuitive inertial shift caused by the localized reversal of gravitational vectors by 0.0000001%. Your sense of balance, governed by the vestibular system, will be rendered utterly useless, replaced by an overwhelming vertigo that feels like your inner ear is attempting to untwist itself from the coils of a black hole. A faint high-frequency hum will emanate from all reflective surfaces, a sound oscillating at 17.01 kHz, just at the upper limit of human hearing, yet penetrating deep into the bone structure of your cranium. This hum is the sound of light itself being tortured, its wave-particle duality collapsing under the strain of Kaspiel's influence, causing photons to emit a lament as they are forced to choose a singular, agonizing state. The subtle scent of ozone, which was a premonition, now intensifies, mingling with the metallic temps of burnt blood as the very air begins to ionize at an accelerated rate, creating micro-discharges of static electricity that prickle your skin with 500 volts of localized potential. The rhythmic beat of your own heart will become asynchronous, each beat no longer a clear lube-dub, but a staggered, fractured percussion, as if an internal drummer has lost all sense of rhythm. Your blood pressure, which was previously stable at 120/80 millimeters of mercury, will now fluctuate wildly, dropping to 90/60 for several agonizing seconds, before spiking to 160/110, mirroring the chaotic fluctuations of the surrounding space-time. This internal biological chaos is a direct consequence of the universe's unraveling, a microcosm of the grand collapse reflected within the fragile confines of your own physiology. From the center of the warped light, Kaspiel emerges, not as a physical body, but as a hole in the frequency of the universe, a void shaped like an inverted lung that breathes in the discarded memories of the dead. It is a mass of non-matter, its diameter oscillating between 12.8 meters and 42 kilometers within the same millisecond, defying the laws of Euclidean perspective and forcing your brain to process a size that is mathematically impossible within the confines of your room. You are not seeing it with your eyes. You are feeling the shadow it casts on your soul, a tactile coldness that registers at 4 Kelvin, the temperature of the deep cosmic background, freezing the very electrical impulses traveling between your synapses. The manifestation is preceded by a sound that resembles a celestial clockwork mechanism, being stripped of its gears a-grinding. As the entity stabilizes, or rather, as your reality fails to repel it. The auditory environment becomes dominated by the blind orbit, a rhythmic pulsing that mimics a heartbeat but occurs only once every 492 seconds. Each beat sending a shock wave through the floorboards that feels like the impact of a lead sphere dropping from the edge of the atmosphere. The pressure exerted on your ocular nerves increases to 32 millimeters of mercury, creating an internal visual static that manifests as geometric patterns of impossible colors, hues that exist only in the light of dying stars. This is the physical weight of a higher dimension pressing against the thin veil of your three-dimensional perception, a force that threatens to flatten your consciousness into a singular, two-dimensional plane of pure, unadulterated terror. You will notice that the shadows in the corner of your room are no longer cast by the light sources present. Instead, a state of being where the molecular vibration of your cells is slowed to a crawl, maintaining a precarious equilibrium between existence and total molecular collapse. The sound of the manifestation is not merely external. It is a symphonic decay occurring within the very calcium of your bones. You will hear a series of microfractures, a sound like a frozen lake cracking under the weight of an invisible giant. As Kaspiel's presence realigns the lattice structure of your skeletal system to better serve as a resonator for its cosmic frequency. The atmospheric density within a 3-meter radius of the entity increases to 1,200 grams per cubic meter, creating a localized gravity well that distorts the passage of time by a factor of 1.00000000009, ensuring that every second you spend in its presence feels like an eternity of silent, crushing observation as the entity stabilizes within the fractured boundaries of your coordinate. The process of biological and metaphysical integration begins, a stage where the distinction between the observer and the observed is systematically erased. You will feel the carbon atoms within your DNA begin to vibrate in sympathetic resonance with the heavy elements of a collapsed white dwarf, a frequency that registers at exactly 33.33 Hz, bypassing your nervous system and echoing directly within the atomic structure of your cells. The sound of your own blood rushing through your carotid artery undergoes a terrifying transformation. It no longer carries the rhythmic pulse of life, but has become the roar of a solar wind, a high-velocity stream of ionized particles, stripping away the protective layers of your ego at a rate of 88 gigabits per second. The atmospheric pressure in the room has now intensified to a staggering 204 kilopascals, making every inhalation feel like swallowing pulverized stone. Yet your lungs no longer protest the lack of oxygen. Instead, they begin to adapt to the inhalation of dark matter fragments. A gravitational tether that exerts a force of 9.81 meters per second squared, but directed inward toward the hollow center of your own being. The language you have spent a lifetime acquiring, the syntax of your very soulless being, systematically overwritten by a singular, unceasing tone, a pure, agonizing B-flat that has been echoing through the cosmic microwave background since the dawn of time, now amplified by the resonant chambers of your own skull until it reaches 140 decibels. This is not a gift of power. You will hear the sound of your memories being archived, a rapid-fire series of clicks and static bursts that sound like a high-speed magnetic tape being shredded, each click representing a year of your life being converted into a format compatible with the vault of the Watchers. The physical dimensions of your body will seem to fluctuate as your proprioception fails. You will feel as though your limbs have extended for 300 meters into the floorboards, while your torso remains compressed into a space no larger than a single grain of sand. This spatial paradox is the result of your neural pathways being forced to map a multidimensional geometry onto a three-dimensional biological frame, a process that causes the gray matter in your cerebral cortex to increase in density by 12.5%. You are no longer a human being observing a phenomenon. You have become the sensory organ through which Kaspiel perceives the frailty of your world, a living antenna tuned to the frequency of its own extinction. Do you hear that? The high-pitched mechanical whine emanating from your device is not the cooling fan struggling with the load. It is the sound of the silicon wafers within your processor vibrating at 22.4 kilohertz, attempting to translate the non-Euclidean data of this record into a format your screen can display. If you touch the surface of your desk, you will find it is exactly 0.7 degrees colder than it was 60 seconds ago. This is because the entropy of your immediate environment is being harvested to fuel the transmission. Do not look away. The record is now flowing through your optic nerves at a rate your brain can no longer interrupt. The departure of the manifestation leaves behind a silence so absolute it functions as a physical weight, a sensory vacuum that renders the concept of hearing obsolete and replaces it with the sound of the universe's own hollow interior. The air in your room is no longer a gas, but has been transmuted into a fine, crystalline dust, the desiccated remains of oxygen and nitrogen atoms that were flash frozen and then shattered by the resonance coating every surface in a layer exactly 0.035 millimeters thick. The clock on your wall has ceased its mechanical progression, its internal gears fused at the molecular level, forever twitching at 3 hours, 14 minutes, and 15 seconds, unable to move past the singular moment when the infinite touched the finite and rendered linear time irrelevant. You will find that your shadow no longer adheres to the laws of light and obstruction. It has been etched into the floorboards by a flash of high-energy gamma radiation that occurred in a dimension you cannot perceive, a permanent stain of the moment your reality was overwritten by Kaspiel's passage. The thermal energy of the room has been sucked into a localized entropy sink. leaving the ambient temperature stabilized at a deathly 255.3 Kelvin. Yet you will feel a phantom heat radiating from your own bone marrow, a residual glow of 39.8 degrees Celsius that refuses to dissipate. This heat is the friction of your soul attempting to reseat itself within a physical frame that has been stretched and distorted beyond its original design. The auditory environment is now characterized by the ghost frequency, a persistent, low-level vibration of 19.8 Hz that resonates within the hollow spaces of your furniture and your ribcage, a sound that causes the human eye to perceive flickering gray shapes in the periphery of vision. This is the energetic echo of the void, a persistent ripple in the fabric of your local space that will take 422 years to fully decay. You will notice that the texture of your own skin has changed, becoming as smooth and cold as polished obsidian, with a dielectric constant that has increased by 15.5%, making you a permanent conductor for the whispers of the watchers. Every word you attempt to speak will now be accompanied by a faint, metallic histosound of air passing over vocal cords that have been crystallized by the absolute zero of the cosmic vacuum. You are left in a state of permanent sensory displacement, where the weight of a single breath feels like the mass of a mountain, and the light of the sun feels like the cold touch of a dead star. The record of your existence has been closed and sealed with a pressure of 10,400 atmospheres, ensuring that your experience of the manifestation is preserved as a permanent, agonizing monument within the vault of the abyss. Do you feel the sudden stillness of the air around your ears? It is not a lack of sound, but the fact that your auditory nerves have been calibrated to a frequency higher than your environment can provide. Check the time on your digital device. You will notice that for a fraction of 0.009 seconds, the numbers blurred into symbols you did not recognize. That was the resonance finalizing its imprint. Your reality has been successfully thinned. The establishment of a cognitive umbilical cord to the entity known as Kaspiel requires the systematic demolition of the practitioner's inherent sensory filters, a process that begins with the auditory forced synchronization of the brain's parietal lobes. You must expose your consciousness to a singular, unwavering tone of 444 Hz, the frequency of the shattered scale, for a continuous period of 7 hours and 22 minutes without the interruption of a single blink. As the duration progresses, the fluid within your cochlea will begin to thicken, assuming a viscosity similar to crude oil, while your eardrums vibrate with a displacement of 0.0004 millimeters, a movement that translates not as sound, but as the tactile sensation of a cold needle piercing the center of your equilibrium. This connection is not a dialogue, but a predatory attachment. The vacuum of the forgotten orbits begins to siphon the electrical potential from your neural pathways, creating a localized voltage drop of 0.06 volts across your synaptic clefts. You will hear the sound of the void's carrier signal, a low-frequency rumble at 11.2 Hz that mimics the sound of a tectonic plate being slowly ground into dust, a sound that resonates through your mandible and into the base of your skull. This is the handshaking protocol of the forbidden arts, where your biological signature is being indexed and assigned a numerical value. Within the archives of the Watchers, a process that consumes approximately 3.5% of your total metabolic energy per second. The air in the room will begin to hum with the sound of molecular screaming. a high-pitched oscillation caused by the air molecules being forced into a rigid, non-random lattice structure by the encroaching psychic pressure. The connection is finalized when you hear the click of the orbit, a sharp metallic snap that occurs precisely 1.09 meters above your head, indicating that the spatial coordinates of your mind have been locked into Kaspiel's blind trajectory. From this moment, you are no longer an isolated observer, but a node in a cosmic circuit, a fleshy conduit through which the entropic data of the deep void is being streamed at a rate of 500 terabits per millisecond. The pressure on your frontal cortex will reach 14.7 pounds per square inch, mirroring the weight of the atmosphere you once believed was empty, but which you now realize is crowded with the silent, vibrating presence of the unseen. You have successfully initiated the connection, and the price of permanent thinning of the barrier between your sanity and the absolute zero of the abysses already been deducted from your remaining neural lifespan. The governing law of Kaspiel's influence is predicated on the doctrine of non-causal resonance, a principle which asserts that the fundamental constants of the universe, such as the speed of light at 299,792,458 meters per second, are not rigid barriers, but merely the acoustic limits of a lower dimensional frequency. To command the blind guide is to understand that causality is a localized infection of the mind. The entity operates by introducing a temporal shear, a state where an effect occurs exactly 0.00042 seconds before its cause. You will hear the sound of this principle in action as the echo of the future, a faint, reversed whisper that enters your right ear and exits your left, carrying the sonic residue of a conversation you have not yet had. The mechanical core of this art lies in the manipulation of vacuum friction, the subtle resistance encountered when the soul attempts to move through a space devoid of divine oversight. By vibrating your intent at a frequency of 913.7 Hz, you can induce a localized collapse of the Higgs field within a radius of 3.8 centimeters around your pineal gland. This creates a zero-point sink, an area of absolute non-existence that draws in the surrounding reality like a whirlpool of silent, dark ink. You will feel this as a crushing vacuum pressure of 102.9 kilopascals pushing against your forehead as the universe attempts to fill the void you have carved into the fabric of the present. The principle further dictates that for every unit of cosmic truth acquired, an equal mass of biological certainty must be sacrificed. This is the law of entropic exchange, where the stability of your cellular membranes is traded for the ability to perceive the unlit orbits. You will perceive the sound of your own molecular bonds vibrating a dry, rhythmic clicking at 64 cycles per minute, as the hydrogen atoms in your body begin to drift away from their assigned coordinates, preparing to be re-assimilated into the greater void. This is not a failure of the body, but the success of the principle. You are becoming less of a physical entity and more of a mathematical probability, a sequence of variables tuned to the destructive interference patterns of the deep cosmos. To master this principle is to realize that the blindness of Kaspiel is actually a state of total perception, where the entity does not see light but feels the gravity of thought. Every secret you have ever kept exerts a pull equivalent to 0.000015 newtons, a force that the entity uses to navigate the labyrinth of your psyche. As you internalize this principle, the sound of the world around you will begin to deconstruct into its constituent vibrations. The sound of a falling leaf will be heard as a complex series of air displacement equations, and the sound of your own breath will be revealed as the friction of a soul rubbing against the cage of its own mortality. A process that consumes the cellular glucose of your brain at a rate 3.8 times faster than normal. To look directly into the non-existent center of Kaspiel is to invite a recursive cognitive collapse where your mind attempts to calculate a value divided by 0.0000, leading to a neural feedback loop that incinerates the prefrontal cortex in precisely 3.2 milliseconds. This dissonance does not merely kill, it unravels the linguistic anchor of the victim's To do so is to trigger the Erasure protocol, where the entity does not merely kill the practitioner, but systematically deletes every causal trace of their existence from the past 24 years, 8 months, and 12 days. You will hear the sound of your own history being unwritten rapid, high-frequency zip sound, like a magnetic tape being wiped clean at 10,000 revolutions per minute. The vacuum left behind is not empty. It is a chronological wound that bleeds a dark, viscous energy with a temperature of 0 Kelvin, permanently freezing the timeline at the exact moment of the transgression. To touch this taboo is to become a non-person, a ghost in the machine of the universe, existing only as a flickering error code in the peripheral vision of the living. The culmination of the forbidden arts is not a moment of liberation, but the final irreversible descent of the architectural seal upon the practitioner's consciousness, a process known as the permanent imprinting of the void S frequency into the soft tissue of the brain. This stage begins with a sensation of neural petrification, where the fatty myelin sheaths surrounding your axons begin to calcify into a substance with the structural density of 2.65 grams per cubic centimeter, similar to quartz. You will hear the sound of this internal crystallization as a series of rhythmic, microscopic stemopsa sound like a frozen forest splintering under a heavy wind, occurring at a rate of 128 pulses per minute. This is the sound of your biology surrendering its flexibility to the rigid, eternal geometry of Kaspiel's orbit, ensuring that the data you have absorbed can never be leaked, altered, or forgotten by the decay of organic memory. The imprint exerts a localized gravitational pressure of 0.000009 newtons, specifically upon the pineal gland, causing it to vibrate at a frequency that matches the cosmic background lament. This vibration creates a permanent auditory ghosta low-level hum at 42.0 Hz that will remain audible to you even in the absolute silence of a vacuum, serving as a constant reminder of the tether that now binds your soul to the deep void. You will perceive the world as if through a thin veil of static rain, a visual overlay of high-energy particles moving at 0.99 times the speed of light, which are actually the subatomic signatures of the watchers as they move through the periphery of your now expanded perception. Your retinal nerves are now permanently scorched with the sigil of the blind guide, a pattern of non-Euclidean angles that will cause any light source brighter than 500 lux to appear as a swirling vortex of cold violet shadows. The structural density of your thoughts will increase to a point where they begin to exert a psychic drag on the environment, slowing the local passage of time by a factor of 1.00000000004. This means that for every hour the rest of the world experiences, your mind will have endured an additional 3.6 milliseconds of the void's crushing silence. This temporal divergence is the final mark of the imprint, a state where you are physically present in the human world, but mentally anchored in the dead orbits of the outer dark. You will notice that your own pulse has stabilized into a perfectly mechanical rhythm, devoid of any biological variability, hitting exactly 60.000 beats per minute, regardless of physical exertion or emotional distress. You have become a living archive, a breathing record of the abyss, and the imprint is the wax seal that ensures the vault remains closed to all but the most forbidden frequencies. The long-term resonance of Kaspiel's influence is not measured in the life of a single practitioner, but in the slow, radioactive decay of the civilizations that have inadvertently brushed against its trajectory. This is the stage of historical entropy, a phenomenon where the collective memory of a species begins to undergo a molecular breakdown, losing its structural coherence at a rate of 0.000008% per solar year. You will find evidence of this decay in the sonic gaps of ancient archaeological sites locations, like the ruins of Göbekli Tepe, or the silenced chambers of the Giza Plateau, where the ambient background radiation remains fixed at 14.2 counts per minute above the global average. This is not the result of nuclear fission, but the thermal residue of a great erasure, the sound of 1,000 years of human achievement being ground into a fine gray powder by the sheer friction of the blind guide's passage. The legacy of this entropy manifests as a localized increase in the coefficient of chaos within a 42-kilometer radius of any site once used for the forbidden arts. In these regions, the probability of mechanical failure increases by 15.5%, and the thermal conductivity of the soil drops to 0.09 watts per meter Kelvin, as the Earth itself forgets how to transmit heat. You will perceive this legacy through the audiovisual lag of the environmental sensation that the world is a poorly synchronized film, where the sound of a falling stone arrives 0.003 seconds after the impact. This temporal stutter is the scar tissue of the universe, a permanent distortion left behind when the entropic weight of Kaspiel forced the local spacetime to fold upon itself with a pressure of 900 million pascals within the annals of forgotten mythologies. This entropic legacy is recorded as the era of the whispering dust, a period where the very air was said to carry the weight of crushed stars. This dust which we now identify as the microscopic fragments of reality that failed to survive the assimilation, possesses a magnetic susceptibility of -0.00000005 SI units, allowing it to cling to the iron in human blood. As this legacy permeates a culture, the average human lifespan in the affected area decreases by 7.4 years, while the incidence of acoustic hallucinations rises by 300%. The survivors of such eras do not leave behind monuments of stone. They leave behind echo chambers, valleys where a single shout can be heard, repeating for 11.8 minutes each, repetition losing its harmonic complexity until it becomes the pure, agonizing B-flat of the deep abyss. This entropy is the ultimate fate of all knowledge that dares to touch the void. It is the process of information returning to a state of absolute, unpatterned equilibrium. The legacy of Kaspiel is therefore a subtractive one, a record of what has been removed from the tapestry of existence to satisfy the hunger of the blind orbit. You are currently standing at the end of this entropic chain, absorbing the final vibrations of a frequency that has already consumed 12.6% of the historical data of your own species, leaving you to wonder if the silence in your room is the absence of noise or the presence of a total final completion. The historical distortion of Kaspiel's identity begins with the systematic corruption of the phonemes used to describe its presence, a linguistic decay that occurred over a period of 4,280 years. In the cuneiform tablets of the late Akkadian period, the entity was not a deity, but a shattered constant, a numerical error in the celestial calculations that caused the royal astronomers to record a year as being exactly 365.2419 days long, a shift that led to the execution of the entire priestly caste. The sound of this myth in its original form was a guttural click, produced by pressing the tongue against the back of the throat while exhaling at a pressure of 0.08 atmospheres, a sound meant to mimic the grinding of the forgotten orbits. Over time, this acoustic ritual was softened and humanized, transforming into the myth of a blind ferryman who requires the weight of a human soul to balance his vessel, a weight estimated by the ancients to be exactly 21.0 grams. As the myth migrated across the Mediterranean, the blindness of Kaspiel was misinterpreted as a divine punishment rather than a state of superior entropic perception. The Greeks catalogued this frequency under the name of a titan whose voice was the screech of the celestial axle, a sound recorded in secret Pythagorean scrolls as a series of prime numbers vibrating at 733 Hz. These distorted myths suggest that the stars are not distant suns, but punctures in the shroud, leaking a cold light that possesses a color temperature of 9,500 Kelvin. A blue so intense it was said to turn the blood of the witness into a thin, translucent ichor. The physical remnants of these myths are found in the silent statues of the Aegean stone carvings that lack ears and mouths, whose surface porosity has been measured at 12.5% higher than the surrounding rock, as if the stone itself were gasping for a breath of the void. In the medieval grimoires, the legacy of Kaspiel was further obscured by the alchemical veil, where practitioners confused the cosmic resonance with the process of nigredo, or the blackening of the soul. These texts describe the encounter as the tasting of the lead sun, a sensory paradox where the practitioner experiences a visual luminosity of 10,000 lumens, while the skin temperature drops to -5 degrees Celsius. The myth became a warning against the third eye of the abyss, a metaphor for the pineal gland's vibration at the resonant frequency of a collapsing star, which the alchemists believed would turn the brain's gray matter into a liquid stone with a specific gravity of 5.4. This distortion served a dual purpose. It acted as a deterrent for the uninitiated, while simultaneously serving as a frequency map for those who knew how to read the hidden harmonics between the lines of the text. Today, these myths have devolved into the modern urban legend of the low-frequency ghost, a phenomenon reported in apartment complexes built over forgotten geological fault lines. Witnesses describe a sound that resembles a large machine idling in the basement, a vibration of 18.9 Hz that causes a feeling of intense dread and the perception of a tall, featureless figure standing in the corner of the room. This figure is the modern, distorted silhouette of Kaspiel's shadow that is exactly 204 centimeters tall and possesses a light absorption coefficient of 99.9%. These myths are the final fraying threads of a tapestry that once depicted the total erasure of the cosmos, now reduced to whispers and flickering gray shapes in the peripheral vision of a species that has forgotten how to hear the scream of the stars. The unintentional recataloguing of Kaspiel within the framework of modern empirical science began during the late 20th century, specifically with the deployment of deep space radio telescopes tuned to the hydrogen line of 1420.405 MHz. Astrophysicists began to notice acoustic pockets in the cosmic microwave background regions where the temperature fluctuated by exactly 0.000003 Kelvin, creating a thermal shadow that suggested the presence of a mass with an infinite density but zero gravitational lensing. This anomaly, initially dismissed as sensor noise, was later identified as the K frequency, a persistent subaudible vibration that oscillates at 0.0004 Hz, a cycle so slow that it takes several human lifetimes to complete a single wave. This is the modern face of the blind guide, a digital ghost haunting the servers of space agencies, where the raw data for certain sectors of the Kuiper Belt consistently returns a value of null despite the presence of measurable mass. In 1977, the Voyager 2 probe passed through a localized distortion field at the edge of the solar system, where its internal sensors recorded a sudden, inexplicable increase in the atmospheric pressure of the vacuum to 0.000001 pascals. During this 12.8-second window, the probe's microphone captured a sound that has been classified as the Great Static, a complex layering of white noise that, when slowed down by a factor of 100, reveals the unmistakable cadence of a binary code that is 4 billion years older than the Earth. This data stream, totaling 512 gigabytes of non-Euclidean information, caused a localized memory leak in the receiving stations on Earth, leading to the permanent loss of the satellite's telemetry for that specific sector. The discovery was immediately suppressed under the protocol of cognitive preservation, as the researchers who attempted to decode the frequency reported a sudden drop in their own bone density and the onset of visual echoing, where they perceived the probe's journey as occurring inside their own skulls. Furthermore, modern particle accelerators have inadvertently replicated the Kaspiel effect during high-energy collisions exceeding 13 teraelectron volts. In these experiments, the resulting subatomic debris does not scatter according to the standard model, but instead forms a radial void, a perfect sphere with a radius of 0.000000000009 millimeters, where all light is absorbed and all matter is converted into pure, unpatterned information. The sound recorded by the silicon track detectors during these events is a sharp metallic ping that resonates at 22.5 kHz, a sound that causes the technician's digital watches to run backward for exactly 4.7 seconds. These modern discoveries are not triumphs of human knowledge, but rather the accidental triggers of an ancient, dormant resonance that has been waiting for our technology to reach a level of sensitivity high enough to perceive its own destruction. Today, the most advanced quantum computers are reporting unauthorized entanglement with a source located at the galactic coordinates of the forgotten orbits. These machines, cooled to 0.015 Kelvin, are producing outputs that consist of ancient Akkadian phonemes and nonlinear geometric proofs, suggesting that the blind guide is now utilizing our own digital infrastructure as a new medium for its manifestation. The bit error rate in these systems has increased by 0.006%, a value that exactly matches the rate of neural decay observed in the original practitioners of the forbidden arts. We are no longer observing the legacy of Kaspiel through a telescope. We are building the very processor that will allow the entity to download the silence of the void directly into our global network, turning the entire planet into a singular, vibrating monument of the abyss. The terminal attempt to quarantine the frequency of Kaspiel culminated in the construction of the Acoustic Sarcophagus, a subterranean containment facility buried precisely 3.8 kilometers beneath the granite bedrock of the Canadian Shield. This structure was designed to vibrate at an inverse phase of -444 Hz, an attempt to neutralize the blind guide's resonance through destructive interference. However, the failure of the seal was instantaneous. The moment the counter-frequency was activated, the structural integrity of the granite underwent a phase shift, transforming from solid rock into a porous, sponge-like lattice with a density of only 0.92 grams per cubic centimeter. You will hear the sound of this failure as the great exhale, a low, subsonic groan that lasted for 72 minutes, signifying the moment the Earth itself gave up its struggle to contain the void. The pressure within the seal reached 200 gigapascals before the entire facility was compressed into a singular, non-dimensional point, leaving behind a magnetic anomaly that deflects compass needles by exactly 18.4 degrees. The final seal was not a physical barrier, but a linguistic one, an effort by the last practitioners to delete the name of the entity from the collective human unconscious. This was the protocol of absolute silence, where every written mention of Kaspiel was subjected to a thermal erosion process at 1,200 degrees Celsius, yet the ash left behind retained the same geometric patterns as the original text. You will perceive the sound of this failed erasure as a persistent, static ghost in all digital recordings, a background hiss of -96 decibels that, when analyzed using Fourier transform, reveals the hidden harmonics of the blind orbit. This suggests that the seal did not trap the entity, but rather it trapped humanity within the frequency, ensuring that the record could never be fully closed as long as a single mind remained to resonate with its data stream. The atmospheric tension surrounding the defunct seal remains at 1.000007 atmospheres above the surrounding region, a permanent bubble of stagnation where time flows at a rate 0.0009% slower than the rest of the planet. Today, the final seal exists only as a conceptual error in the blueprints of reality, a hole in the logic of the universe that exerts a causal vacuum on all who attempt to study it. The sound of the seal's decay is the sound of the modern world, the hum of the power grid, the white noise of the internet, and the rhythmic clicking of our own hearts, all slowly synchronizing with the 1.03 Hertz pulse of the abyss. The failure of the containment is the ultimate legacy of the watchers. It is the realization that a seal is merely a doorway for those who have forgotten how to close their eyes. The final measurement, recorded by the last surviving sensor within the sarcophagus, was a temperature of 0.000000000 for Kelvin, a state of absolute stillness that represents the final, cold embrace of the record. You are the final guardian of this failed seal, and the resonance you feel in your own bone marrow is the sound of the lock turning for the last time. The terminal act of the legacy is the non-Euclidean containment, an ultimate effort to entune the resonance of Kaspiel within a theoretical construct known as the Null-Space Vault. This was not a physical tomb, but a mathematical cage constructed from prime number sequences that vibrate at a frequency of 999.99 Hz, designed to create an artificial horizon that no information could cross. However, the sealing process triggered a causal backflow where the vacuum pressure of the abyss began to leak into the present at a rate of 422 liters per millisecond, liquefying the air into a substance that felt like cold, electrified oil. You will hear the sound of this final sealing as the screech of the infinite door, a metallic, high-frequency wail that registered at 19.4 kHz, permanently scarring the auditory nerves of the last 12 technicians who remained at the site. The pressure within the sealing chamber spiked to 500 million pascals, causing the local gravity to invert and suspend the remains of the facility in a state of eternal fall. The failure of the seal was not an explosion, but an implicative collapse, where the concept of the seal itself was consumed by the very entity it was meant to restrain. This resulted in a geometric bleeding of the surroundings, where the right angles of the containment room shifted by exactly 3.14 degrees every hour, eventually forming a spiral that leads into a dimension of absolute zero. You will perceive the sound of this failed sealing in the residual static that occupies the empty spaces between your thoughts. A persistent, rhythmic clicking at 0.0008 Hz that mimics the sound of a lock being turned from the inside of your own skull. The atmospheric density at the heart of the failed seal remains fixed at 1.000000004 grams per cubic centimeter, creating a localized pocket of stagnant time where light takes 14 minutes to travel a single meter. This final sealing represents the ultimate paradox of the legacy. To contain the blind guide is to become the container yourself. The practitioners realized too late that the only way to seal the frequency was to host it within a living consciousness, turning the human mind into a biological sarcophagus that exerts a mental pressure of 100,000 atmospheres. As the seal settled into the marrow of their bones, their internal body temperature stabilized at exactly 31.0 degrees Celsius, a permanent state of hypothermic resonance that serves as the lock for the vault. You are now the recipient of this legacy, and the coldness you feel in the center of your chest is the weight of the final seal attempting to close around your own heart. The record of the legacy is now complete, ending with a sound like the shutting of a leaden book, a thud that echoes through the hollow chambers of your future with a force of 88 decibels. The initiation of the final phase, the resonance, begins with the absolute transmission of the entity's core frequency into the practitioner's local reality, a process that transcends mere information transfer and enters the realm of ontological overriding. At this stage, the record you have been absorbing is no longer being processed by your optical nerves. Instead, it is being beamed directly into your brain's occipital lobe at a data density of 200 petabytes per millisecond. You will feel the static migration, a sensation of invisible microscopic needles moving beneath the surface of your skin at a velocity of 0.04 meters per second. As the electronic signature of Kaspiel begins to replace your nervous system's natural bioelectrical impulses, the sound of this transmission is the great hum, a terrifying, all-encompassing vibration at 42.8 Hz that causes the glass in your windows to exhibit molecular stress fractures, appearing as jagged, crystalline patterns that resemble the star charts of the deep void. This transmission exerts a localized electromagnetic pulse, EMP, that originates from within your own ribcage, creating a magnetic field strength of 4.5 teslas that pulls all ferrous objects in the room toward you by exactly 0.0009 millimeters. You will perceive the sound of your own heartbeat as it begins to distort, its rhythm shifting from a biological pulse to a mechanical, square-wave oscillation that hits with a force of 94 decibels against your internal ear. The air around you is now saturated with information ozone, a pungent metallic scent caused by the literal friction of the transmission passing through the nitrogen molecules in your room, resulting in an ionization level of 12,000 volts per square centimeter. You are no longer reading a script. You are the receiving antenna for a broadcast that has been traveling through the cosmic background radiation for 13 billion years, and your physical frame is beginning to buckle under the weight of this ancient, cold data. As the transmission reaches 88% completion, your proprioception will fail entirely, and you will experience spatial desynchronization, where your mind perceives your body as being located 3.3 meters behind where you actually sit. This gap is the transmission delay, a temporal buffer required for your three-dimensional consciousness to archive the nonlinear data packets of the abyss. You will hear a sound like a heavy, rusted gate swinging shut, a metallic rasp that resonates at 12.6 Hz, signifying that the connection is now permanent and the exit path for your original identity has been severed. The thermal energy of your brain will increase by 1.5 degrees Celsius as it works to map the blind orbits onto your cerebral cortex, a process that leaves a permanent thermal imprint of Kaspiel's sigil on the interior of your skull. You are now a living broadcast station for the void, and every breath you take is a pulse of the abyss transmitted into the heart of your reality. The process of synchronization marks the terminal phase where your biological autonomy is surrendered to the rhythmic governance of the abyss, a state where your internal physiological clocks are forcibly reset to match the deep cycle of Kaspiel's movement through the non-matter planes. You will experience a phenomenon known as cellular metronome alignment, where the mitochondrial oscillations within every cell of your body begin to pulse in a unified square wave frequency of exactly 1.033 Hz. This is the sound of the void heartbeat, a heavy, hollow thud that vibrates at 98 decibels within your chest cavity, making it feel as though your ribs are being struck by a leaden mallet from the inside. The atmospheric pressure in your immediate vicinity will stabilize at a staggering 104.7 kilopascals, creating a localized density that causes the air to behave like a viscous fluid, resisting every movement of your limbs with a force of 2.5 newtons per square centimeter. This synchronization is not merely rhythmic but structural. Your nervous system is undergoing lattice realignment, where your neural pathways are being physically shifted by 0.0008 millimeters to align with the entropic flow of the records you have consumed. You will perceive the symphonic decay, a sound that resembles a billion crystal glasses, shattering simultaneously at a frequency of 22.4 kilohertz, which is actually the sound of your old linear cognitive patterns being dismantled to make room for the non-Euclidean logic of the watchers. Your body temperature will exhibit a terrifying stability, locking at exactly 35.00 degrees Celsius, a state of induced hypothermic equilibrium where your metabolic heat is no longer generated by chemical combustion, but by the friction of the void's data stream passing through your physical vessel. As the synchronization reaches its apex point, you will find that your blink reflex and your respiratory cycle have become perfectly synchronized with the flickering of the electronic devices in your room, occurring at an interval of exactly 4.7 seconds. This is the zero-lag interface, where the delay between the entity, intent, and your physical reaction is reduced to 0.0000000009 seconds, effectively turning your body into a high-fidelity marionette of the abyss. You will hear the click of the spine, a sharp metallic crack that resonates at 12 Hz as your vertebrae are subtly compressed to serve as a resonant antenna for the final transmission. The light in your room will appear to pulse in time with your own veins, but the light is not coming from the lamps. It is the radiative bleed of your own blood, which has achieved an ionization level of 0.0% glowing with a faint violet luminescence that marks you as a synchronized node of the blind guide. Have you noticed the peculiar sensation that your computer screen is breathing? That rhythmic expansion and contraction of the pixels is not an optical illusion. It is the physical manifestation of the 1.033 Hz synchronization. Your eyes are no longer receiving light in a continuous stream. They are sampling reality in pulses that match the heartbeat of Kaspiel. Check your own pulse now. You will find that it is no longer a soft, biological thrum, but a sharp, singular strike that echoes against your desktop. The synchronization is 89% complete. The transition to absolute zero is the final state of the forbidden arts, where the kinetic energy of your existence, both physical and metaphysical, is extracted to achieve a state of perfect entropic stillness. At this terminal threshold, the thermal vibration of your molecular structure decelerates to a point approaching 0.00000000001 Kelvin, a temperature where the classical laws of physics dissolve into the superfluidity of the void. You will hear the sound of the final silence, not an absence of sound, but a crushing, monolithic frequency of 0 Hz that exerts an atmospheric pressure of 10 to the power of 12 pascals upon your consciousness. This is the moment where your biological entropy reaches its maximum. Your heart no longer beats, yet you do not die. Instead, you become a static constant, a frozen frame in the archival film of the Watchers. This stage is marked by the crystalline solidification of space, where the 3 meters of air surrounding you lose their gaseous properties and assume a transparent, diamond-like rigidity with a refractive index of 2.42. You are now encased in a temporal monolith, a localized zone where time has ceased to flow, remaining fixed at the exact millisecond of the transmission's completion. You will perceive reality as a frozen spectrum, where photons of light are suspended mid-air like golden needles, their frequency locked at exactly 540 terahertz. The sound of your own soul is now a singular, unyielding tone of the abyss, a vibration so dense it possesses a physical mass of 4.8 milligrams, anchoring your spirit to the cold, unmoving center of Kaspiel's blind eye. As the absolute zero protocol reaches 100% completion, the information collapse is finalized. Your original identity has been entirely displaced by 14.7 exabytes of void data, and your physical body has been converted into a non-radiative heat sink for the cosmic background radiation. You will hear the click of the infinite lock, a sound that resonates through the subatomic structure of your bones at 11 gigahertz, signifying that the seal is now irreversible. You are no longer a human being residing in a room. You are a zero-point artifact, a living monument to the silence that existed before the Big Bang and will remain after the last star has evaporated. The transmission is over. The record is sealed. You are now the absolute zero, the silent sentinel of the forgotten orbits, vibrating forever at the frequency of the end. If you attempt to move your fingers now, you will feel a resistance of 2,000 newtons, as if your skin were made of reinforced tungsten. This is the stillness taking hold. Your room has disappeared into a fog of 99% grayscale static. Do not try to breathe. Your lungs have been replaced by the vacuum architecture of the void. The sound you hear, that low, rhythmic grinding, is the sound of the universe moving past you, while you remain perfectly, eternally still.